The conference room fell silent when Susan said it. "Brooke lacks vision." Her voice was smooth, almost kind, like she was doing me a favor by being honest. 20 people sat around that table, and every single one of them looked away from me. My promotion announcement, the one I'd been promised for 6 months, died right there in front of the entire leadership team. Susan smiled, that perfect corporate smile, the one she'd practiced in 1,000 meetings. "She's solid operationally, don't misunderstand me. But the director level requires strategic thinking she just hasn't demonstrated yet." My hands gripped the edge of my chair under the table. Heat crawled up my neck, spreading across my face. I wanted to defend myself, to list every campaign I'd saved, every metric I'd exceeded, every late night I'd spent fixing problems she'd created. But my voice caught in my throat. The VP of marketing nodded along with Susan's assessment like it was gospel truth. Even Evan, my supposed peer, studied his laptop screen intensely. Nobody spoke up. Nobody questioned her. They just let her words become my reality. I made it to the bathroom before the tears came. They hovered at the edge of my eyes, hot and furious, but I wouldn't let them fall. Not here. Not where someone might see weakness and confirm everything Susan had just said about me. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, shocked, like I'd been slapped. I gripped the cold porcelain sink until my knuckles went white. "You will remember this moment," I whispered to myself. The words surprised me with their intensity. Something had shifted inside. Something cold and calculating replacing the heat of humiliation. I'd spent 2 years being the good team player, the reliable one, the person who made Susan look competent. I'd fixed her mistakes, covered her blind spots, delivered results that got credited to her vision. And this was my reward. Public humiliation disguised as honest feedback. I dried my face carefully, reapplied my lipstick with steady hands, and walked back to my desk. But I wasn't the same person who'd entered that conference room. That version of Brooke had died there. What walked out was someone different, someone patient and dangerous. 6 months earlier I'd been so hopeful, so stupidly optimistic. I joined Luxford Cosmetics as a senior marketing manager, brought in to revitalize their struggling retail campaigns. Susan had been warm during the interview, talking about collaboration and innovation and empowering her team. I'd believed every word. Those first months I'd worked insane hours. 70-hour weeks were normal. I rebuilt their customer segmentation model, restructured their influencer partnerships, and redesigned their retail merchandising strategy. Revenue in my product category jumped 23% in 1 quarter. I exceeded every single KPI they'd given me. But something strange kept happening. In leadership meetings, Susan would present my frameworks as our team's approach, or the direction we're taking. My name never came up. When I'd mention my specific contributions, she'd smile and say, "We're all in this together, Brooke. There's no I in the team." I'd laughed along, thinking it was just corporate culture. I hadn't understood yet that she was systematically erasing me, making sure nobody above her knew exactly who was driving the results. The isolation started subtly, so gradually I almost didn't notice. Email threads I should have been on suddenly stopped including me. When I'd ask about missing information, Susan would say, "Oh, Brooke doesn't need to be looped in on every little thing. She's got enough on her plate." She'd phrase it like she was protecting me from overwork, being thoughtful about my bandwidth. But the effect was clear. I was being cut out of strategic conversations, kept in the dark about decisions that directly impacted my work. Meanwhile, Evan was everywhere. Evan, who'd started 3 months after me and had delivered exactly 0 successful campaigns. He was in every meeting, copied on every email, invited to every leadership lunch. Susan introduced him as my strategic right hand, and praised his innovative thinking. His innovative thinking consisted mostly of repeating things I'd said in previous meetings and taking credit for industry trends he'd read about in trade publications. But Susan loved him, championed him, and made sure everyone knew he was special. The favoritism was so blatant it became a running joke among the junior staff. Everyone could see it except, apparently, senior leadership. The moment of clarity came during a team dinner at an expensive steakhouse downtown. We were celebrating the successful launch of a campaign I designed and executed entirely myself. Susan stood up to make a toast, wine glass raised. "I want to thank Brooke for being such a safe pair of hands," she said, smiling at me warmly. "In this business, you need people you can rely on to execute the basics reliably." The word hit me like ice water. She meant it as a compliment, I could tell from her tone. But what I heard was predictable, unexciting, replaceable. Not visionary. Not leadership material. Just safe. I smiled back, raised my glass, and played my part perfectly. But something inside me had snapped, clean and quiet like a bone breaking. After that dinner, I stopped reacting and started observing. I watched Susan in meetings, noting her patterns, how she positioned herself, who she cultivated, where her blind spots were. And they were everywhere. She talked constantly about disruption and innovation but never looked at actual data. She chased trends instead of understanding customers. She built flash over substance every single time. I started documenting everything quietly, building a picture of exactly how she was failing. I created a folder on my personal laptop and named it North Star. Inside, I began compiling the truth with the precision of someone building a legal case. Every report that showed declining customer satisfaction in Susan's flagship brands. Every retailer complaint she'd ignored. Every sales drop she'd explained away with market conditions. I pulled customer quotes from focus groups, the raw, unfiltered feedback before Susan's team sanitized it for presentations. I tracked competitive analysis she'd dismissed. I documented the pattern of her chasing shiny objects while fundamentals crumbled. None of it was malicious or fabricated. Just data, carefully organized, time-stamped, cross-referenced. The picture it painted was damning. Susan was all surface, no strategy. She'd risen on charisma and confidence while the brands under her leadership slowly bled market share. But she was so good at managing up, at controlling the narrative, that nobody above her saw it clearly. Not yet. I didn't know exactly how I'd use this information. But I knew that data, properly timed, becomes destiny. So I gathered it meticulously and waited for the right moment. 3 weeks after the promotion disaster, I noticed something interesting in the quarterly portfolio review. Hidden at the bottom of page 17 was a product line called Meridian Naturals. It had been part of an acquisition 2 years ago, then essentially abandoned. No marketing budget. No retail strategy. Just sitting there, generating minimal revenue but with surprisingly strong fundamentals when you looked closely. The customer retention rate was exceptional, over 70%. Reviews were passionate, almost cult-like. This changed my skin. I'll never use anything else. Why doesn't everyone know about this? The problem was visibility, not product quality. Nobody was telling the story. Nobody was building the brand. It was a diamond buried in mud. Exactly the kind of opportunity Susan would never notice because it wasn't flashy or trendy. I started studying Meridian like it was a secret language I needed to decode. I read every customer review, analyzed purchasing patterns, understood who these buyers were and what they cared about. Natural ingredients, sustainability, authenticity. They wanted truth, not tricks. Connection, not celebrity. Everything Susan's brands weren't. This could be my canvas, my proof that vision wasn't about noise. It was about resonance. I applied for a lateral transfer to lead the Meridian division during a restructuring. When Susan heard, she actually laughed. "You're taking the dead brand," she said during a hallway conversation, loud enough for others to hear. "Brooke, you'll disappear over there. Nobody pays attention to that corner of the business." I kept my face neutral, pleasant. Maybe that's the point. She thought I was admitting defeat, accepting my limitations, choosing the safe path where I couldn't embarrass myself. She approved the transfer immediately, probably relieved to have me out of her division. The HR paperwork went through in 3 days, unusually fast. On my last day in Susan's department, she gave me a card signed by the team. Inside she'd written, Wishing you success in your new adventure. Remember, not everyone is meant for the spotlight." I smiled and thanked her graciously. What she didn't know was that I'd just been handed complete autonomy, a blank slate, and a product that actually worked. While she stayed in the spotlight managing decline with clever presentations, I'd be in the shadows building something real. I couldn't have planned it better if I'd tried. My first day in the Meridian division felt like walking into a tomb. Empty desks scattered throughout a half-abandoned floor. File cabinets covered in dust. A conference room with broken chairs nobody had bothered to replace. The previous manager had left 6 months ago. Since then, the division had essentially run on autopilot with a skeleton crew of 3 people who seemed surprised anyone cared enough to show up. My office was a corner desk with a flickering overhead light. No budget, no team, no expectations. Most people would have seen failure waiting to happen. I saw freedom. Nobody was watching me here. Nobody cared what I did or how I did it. There were no Susan-approved processes, no mandatory brand guidelines, no politics to navigate. Just me, a forgotten product line, and complete autonomy to try whatever I wanted. I stood in that empty space, breathed in the quiet, and whispered to myself, "Perfect." For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I could actually work instead of performing. I could build instead of defending. I could prove what I'd always known, that I didn't lack vision. I lacked freedom to use it. I spent my first week just listening and learning. I called the 3 remaining team members into meetings, not to give orders but to understand what they knew. I visited the 2 retail locations that still carried Meridian products and watched customers interact with the displays. I read 2 years of customer service emails, the unfiltered voice of people who loved this brand. Then I locked myself in my sad little office and built a plan. 90 days to prove the concept. No flash, no big promises. Just focused execution on 3 things: product positioning, customer experience, and retail relationships. While Susan's division was chasing influencer partnerships and viral campaigns, I'd focus on fundamentals. Make the product easier to discover. Tell its story honestly. Build loyalty through quality and authenticity. My plan was so simple it fit on 2 pages. No fancy decks, no buzzwords, no claims about disruption. Just clear objectives, measurable milestones, and realistic resource allocation. When I finished, I sent it to my new boss, the VP of Product Innovation, who'd barely acknowledged my transfer. He responded 3 days later. "Looks fine. Keep me posted." That was it. No approval process. No committee review. Just permission to try. I started immediately. I launched a pilot so small it barely registered in corporate systems. 2 retail stores, one in Portland and one in Austin. New merchandising displays I designed myself. Updated product descriptions that actually explained benefits instead of using marketing nonsense. Staff training on how to talk about natural ingredients authentically. A simple Instagram account with real customer photos, not paid influencers. The budget was $15,000, mostly my own division's forgotten funds. I told no one outside my tiny team what I was doing. No big announcements, no permission seeking. Just quiet execution. The first week, nothing happened. Sales stayed flat. I adjusted the messaging, made the displays more prominent, and added customer testimonials. Week 2 brought a small uptick, 5% increase in both stores. Week 3, 10%. Week 4, 17%. By day 60, sales in those 2 stores had doubled. Customers were posting about Meridian without being asked, tagging friends, sharing before and after photos. The reviews poured in. Finally, a brand that feels honest. This is what I've been searching for. It was working. Not explosively, not viral. Just steadily, authentically, building real momentum. I documented everything with the same precision I'd used in my North Star folder. Numbers, quotes, patterns, proof. On day 72, I submitted a formal request for an expansion budget. $30,000 to scale the pilot to 10 more stores. Nothing dramatic, just methodical growth based on proven results. The request went through the standard approval chain, which meant it crossed Susan's desk for review. She killed it immediately. I got an email from finance. Marketing leadership has redirected these funds to higher priority initiatives. Higher priority meant Susan's latest campaign, a celebrity partnership that would cost $300,000. I could have fought it, escalated, made noise. Instead, I went directly to finance with my pilot results. Hard data showing double-digit growth in a category that had been flat for 2 years. ROI that was better than anything Susan's division had delivered in 18 months. The finance director, an analytical woman named Teresa, studied my numbers carefully. "Why did Susan block this?" she asked. I chose my words carefully. Perhaps she hasn't seen the full performance data yet. Teresa made a note. "I'm going to ask for a review of fund allocation across divisions. These results are too significant to ignore." That was the first crack in Susan's authority. Small, barely visible. But cracks always start small. With finance reviewing allocations, I focused on what I could control. The product itself. Meridian's packaging was dated, forgettable, designed a decade ago. The brand name felt corporate and cold. Everything about it screamed afterthought. I couldn't change the formula, but I could change how it was presented and perceived. Working with my small team and a freelance designer I hired from my own pocket, we reimagined everything. The new name, Meridian and Moon, suggesting natural cycles and balance. New packaging in sage green and cream, minimalist and elegant. Copy that was soft, honest, personal. For skin that changes with you. Made with intention. Your story, our support. We stopped trying to impress and started trying to connect. The rebrand cost me $12,000 of my own savings. It was insane using personal money for corporate work. But I needed this to succeed more than I needed that money. This wasn't just about proving Susan wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I'd been right all along. That vision wasn't about flash or noise. It was about understanding what people actually needed and giving it to them honestly. The first samples arrived on a Tuesday. I opened the box in my empty office and just stared. It was beautiful. Felt different. Felt real. This could actually work. The first external validation came from an unexpected source. A senior buyer at Nordstrom, someone I'd never met, emailed me directly after seeing the new packaging at one of our pilot stores. "This feels different from everything else in the category," she wrote. "The authenticity is refreshing. Can we talk about broader placement?" I read that email 5 times, feeling something loosen in my chest. This wasn't just my opinion. This wasn't just my bias. Someone outside the company, someone with no reason to be kind, had seen what I was building and recognized its value. I didn't celebrate loudly or forward the email to everyone. I simply filed it away carefully, adding it to my growing collection of proof. Ammunition for when the moment came. Because I knew the moment was coming. Susan was too territorial, too threatened by success she didn't control. Eventually, she'd notice what I was building and try to claim it or kill it. I needed to be ready with undeniable evidence that this was mine, built from nothing while she'd been focused elsewhere. The Nordstrom buyer and I scheduled a call. She wanted to test Meridian and Moon in 15 stores by next quarter. That would triple my current retail footprint in one move. I said yes immediately. Susan heard about the Nordstrom deal through the corporate grapevine. I was in a cross-functional meeting when she walked in unexpectedly, her heels clicking sharply on the tile floor. "Brooke, I heard some exciting news about Meridian," she said, her voice syrupy with false warmth. "I'd love to be more involved in guiding the strategy as you scale. This could be a nice complement to our core brand portfolio." Translation: she wanted to take ownership of my success before it became too visible. I smiled pleasantly. "Of course, Susan. I'll make sure to keep you updated on major developments." I never did. I stopped sending her updates, stopped including her in planning documents, stopped seeking her input. When she'd email asking for status, I'd respond with vague pleasantries and redirect her to public reports. Technically, I was in a different division now, so she had no direct authority over me. But I was careful never to be insubordinate, never to give her grounds to complain. Just quietly autonomous, building my world while she stayed in hers. I could tell it irritated her, that lack of control. She was used to managing narratives, to knowing everything happening in her sphere of influence. My silence was a gap in her knowledge, and gaps made her nervous. But she should be nervous. 3 months after I'd moved to Meridian, the corporation announced an external brand audit. A consulting firm was coming in to evaluate all product lines and their market positioning. Susan mocked it in an all-leadership email I was copied on. "These audits are typically a waste of time and money," she wrote. "But we'll participate professionally, of course." I said nothing publicly, but privately I prepared extensively. The auditors spent 2 days with my division. I gave them everything: sales data, customer feedback, market analysis, growth projections. I showed them the pilot results, the Nordstrom partnership, and organic social media growth. I explained the strategy clearly and backed every claim with evidence. A week later, the preliminary findings leaked through finance. Susan's flagship brands were underperforming significantly against market trends. Customer satisfaction was declining. Retail partners were losing confidence. Meanwhile, a small division called Meridian and Moon was showing exceptional growth trajectory and customer loyalty. The report didn't name me specifically, but anyone who read it carefully could trace the success back to decisions I'd made. The audit exposed what my North Star folder had already shown me. Susan was managing decline with good presentations while actual performance crumbled. The board started asking questions. Uncomfortable questions Susan couldn't deflect with charm and confidence. 2 weeks after the audit report circulated, the CFO asked me to present my pilot results to the executive leadership team. "Just for context," he said casually. "Help us understand what's working in the portfolio." My hands shook slightly as I built the presentation deck. This was it. The moment where I'd either prove myself or confirm Susan's assessment that I lacked vision. I kept the deck simple, data-forward, letting results speak for themselves. No flash, no hype. Just the truth. The presentation was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I arrived early, set up carefully, and waited. The executives filed in. The CFO, the COO, the VP of Retail Partnerships, others I barely knew. Susan wasn't invited, which told me everything about how seriously leadership was taking this conversation. I presented calmly, walking through the strategy, the execution, the results. When I finished, silence filled the room for a long moment. Then the COO leaned forward. "Why haven't we scaled this across the portfolio?" she asked. "These numbers are better than anything I've seen in months." The CFO nodded. "The ROI is exceptional, and the customer feedback is remarkably strong." I chose my words carefully. Meridian had been under-resourced. With proper support, I believe we could expand significantly. They asked pointed questions for 30 minutes. Not challenging but genuinely curious. Understanding. When the meeting ended, the CEO stopped me at the door. "Impressive work, Brooke. We'll be in touch." I walked back to my office in a daze. That presentation had shifted something fundamental. The people who mattered now knew what I could do. Susan's response was predictable and desperate. 2 weeks after my executive presentation, she launched a flashy counter-campaign for her main brand. A complete rebrand with celebrity influencers, expensive packaging, bold claims. The budget was $500,000. The campaign screamed innovation and disruption, with all the subtlety of a car alarm. Press releases went out. Social media exploded with paid promotions. For 3 days, it looked like Susan had pulled off another miracle, drowning out my quiet success with sheer volume. Then the metrics started coming in. Customer response was lukewarm. The celebrity partnership felt inauthentic, forced. Retail partners were skeptical about the new positioning. Pre-orders came in 30% below projections. By week 2, it was clear the campaign was underperforming dramatically. By week 4, it was a complete failure. Susan tried to pivot, to explain, to blame external factors. But the numbers were undeniable. She'd spent massive resources on flash and style, and the market had rejected it. Meanwhile, my modest, authentic approach was steadily building loyalty and revenue. I watched it implode in real time from my quiet corner. My face remained neutral, unreadable in meetings. But inside I felt a cold satisfaction. She'd tried to outshine me with the exact approach that never worked, and she'd proven my point perfectly. Authenticity beats performance. Substance beats flash. Vision isn't about being loud. It's about being right. The board meeting in late November changed everything. The COO had called for consolidation talks, reviewing the entire brand portfolio to identify redundancies and optimization opportunities. Susan attended, ready to defend her territory with presentations and promises. I was invited to present the Meridian and Moon case study as a model for growth. Susan tried to control the narrative from the start, talking about market challenges and the need for bold innovation. She positioned her failed campaign as a necessary risk, a learning experience, the kind of thinking that drives industry change. But then the CFO presented actual performance data side by side. Susan's brands: declining revenue, falling customer satisfaction, shrinking retail presence. Meridian and Moon: double-digit growth, rising loyalty scores, expanding partnerships. The contrast was devastating. Susan interrupted repeatedly, trying to explain context, to reframe the numbers. But data doesn't lie, and this data was brutal. I sat quietly through most of the meeting. When asked direct questions, I answered simply and honestly. No attacks on Susan, no personal commentary. Just facts about what had worked and why. The board members' expressions told the story. They'd seen through Susan's performance to the reality underneath. Her time was ending. Mine was beginning. The meeting ended with a directive for strategic portfolio realignment. Corporate speak for decisions that would hurt. Over the next 3 weeks, Susan began to unravel publicly. Her temper, usually controlled and hidden, started slipping. In a team meeting, she berated a junior analyst for missing a deadline. Her voice sharp and cruel. Someone recorded it and the audio leaked to HR. She sent angry emails to retail partners who'd questioned her strategy. Those emails made their way to the COO's desk. She demanded budget increases while other divisions were cutting costs, and couldn't justify the spending with results. HR opened what they called a culture assessment of Susan's division. They interviewed team members confidentially. The stories poured out. Years of taking credit, of favoritism, of crushing anyone who threatened her. People who'd been too scared to speak up found their courage now that leadership was finally paying attention. I stayed completely out of it. I didn't contribute to HR's investigation, didn't gossip, didn't pile on. I just kept building Meridian and Moon, delivering consistent results, proving every day that my approach worked. Susan still didn't see what was coming. She thought this was temporary turbulence, that her charm and political skills would save her like always. She couldn't imagine that the foundation had already cracked beyond repair. That all her carefully constructed authority was collapsing while she was still pretending everything was fine. The retail revolt happened organically. Major retail partners started reaching out directly to request more Meridian and Moon products and reduce orders of Susan's flagship brand. Nordstrom expanded from 15 stores to 50. A boutique chain in California wanted exclusive variants. A major pharmacy chain asked about mass market positioning. The market was voting with actual orders, and the verdict was clear. Susan demanded an emergency meeting with the VP of sales to understand why retailers were turning against her brands. The VP explained bluntly that retailers followed customer demand, and customers were choosing Meridian and Moon. Susan tried to position it as category cannibalization, arguing that my success was hurting the overall portfolio. But the data showed the opposite. Meridian was bringing in new customers, not stealing existing ones. We were growing the total market, exactly what the company needed. When Susan cornered me in the hallway one afternoon, her composure was fractured. "You did this deliberately," she hissed, quiet enough that nearby people couldn't hear. "You undermined everything I built." I looked at her calmly. I built something the market wanted. That's not undermining. That's the vision. Her face flushed with anger. You lack vision, Brooke. I said it then, and it's still true. I smiled slightly. The market decided differently. That's all that matters. I walked away, leaving her standing alone in that hallway. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it just felt necessary. Like closing a door that should have been closed long ago. The board vote happened on a cold Tuesday in January. A closed-door session I wasn't present for, but Teresa from finance briefed me afterward. The decision was to sunset Susan's flagship brand entirely and replace it as the portfolio anchor with Meridian and Moon. The motion passed 7-1. Susan's division would be absorbed into other departments. Her role would be restructured. Corporate speak for elimination. They'd given Susan 2 options: take a demotion to individual contributor or accept a severance package. She chose severance. I found out through an official announcement 2 days later. Leadership realignment to support strategic growth initiatives. Susan's name appeared in the list of departures, professional and clinical. No drama, no details. Just a name and a departure date. I watched from my office window as she left the building for the last time. She carried a small box of personal items, walking quickly to her car with her head down. No farewell party, no tearful goodbye. Just silence and a security escort to make sure she returned her badge. She'd entered this company with fanfare and promises. She left like a ghost, barely remembered before she was even gone. I didn't feel joy watching her go. Felt relieved. Relief that competence had finally been recognized. Relief that I could build without her shadow. Relief that the story had ended the way it should have. The official launch of Meridian and Moon as the portfolio flagship happened in March. A nationwide rollout to 800 retail locations. New marketing campaign that I designed personally, built around real customer stories and authentic connection. No celebrities, no gimmicks. Just honest communication about products that actually worked. The tagline was simple: made with vision. A subtle reference to Susan's words that only I fully appreciated. The launch exceeded every projection. First month revenue was 40% higher than forecast. Social media engagement was organic and genuine. Customer reviews poured in, passionate and loyal. Finally, a brand that feels real. This is what the industry needed. Meridian and Moon understands us. Industry publications covered it as a case study in authentic marketing. I gave interviews carefully, always crediting my team, always focusing on the work rather than the drama behind it. I never mentioned Susan by name. I didn't need to. The success spoke loudly enough. At the 6-month mark, Meridian and Moon had become the company's fastest-growing brand in 5 years. The board promoted me to Vice President of Brand Innovation, with authority over multiple product lines. The role Susan had held, but reimagined for someone who actually understood how to build lasting value. I'd gone from lacking vision to leading the company's innovation strategy in less than 18 months. 1 year after Susan's departure, I walked past my old floor out of nostalgia. The space had been completely reorganized. Susan's corner office was now a collaboration area with modular furniture. Her name plaque was gone, replaced by a sign that said, Innovation Lab. New people filled the desks, working on projects I'd approved. The energy felt different, lighter somehow. People talked openly instead of whispering. Ideas flowed instead of being filtered through political calculations. I stood there for a moment, remembering that conference room meeting. Susan's voice saying I lacked vision. The humiliation burned through me. The silent collapse inside while everyone watched. That moment had felt like an ending, like proof that I'd been wrong about myself. But it had actually been a beginning. The catalyst that forced me to stop seeking approval and start building proof. I'd learned something crucial in that year. You don't need revenge. Revenge is messy and temporary. What you need is results that outlive the people who doubted you. Results so undeniable that history rewrites itself, and your name becomes associated with success while theirs fades into footnotes. Susan had tried to erase me, to make me small and safe and forgettable. Instead, she'd freed me to build something she never could. Something real and lasting and significant. For that, I was almost grateful. 2 years after that devastating promotion meeting, I stood in a boardroom presenting our next phase of growth. The board hung on every word, asking thoughtful questions, trusting my judgment. The same room where Susan had once declared I lacked vision now treated my vision as the company's most valuable asset. After the meeting, the CEO stopped me in the hallway. "You've transformed this company," he said simply. "The board considers you a key part of our future." I thanked him professionally, but inside I felt that same quiet intensity from the bathroom mirror 2 years ago. The moment I'd whispered to my reflection that I'd remember. I remembered. Every slight, every dismissal, every time Susan had taken credit or blocked my path. But I hadn't let those memories become bitterness. I'd transformed them into fuel, into determination, into the patience required to build something that would last. Walking back to my office, past the innovation lab that used to be Susan's domain, I thought about what vision really meant. It wasn't about being the loudest voice or the flashiest presentation. It wasn't about disruption for its own sake or chasing trends. Real vision was seeing what others missed. Understanding what mattered underneath the noise. Having the courage to build authentically even when everyone said you were too safe, too boring, too lacking. Susan had been right about one thing. Not everyone is meant for the spotlight. But she'd been wrong about which of us that described. She'd needed the spotlight because without it, her emptiness showed. I never needed it at all. I just needed the freedom to build something true. And in the end, the work had spoken louder than any spotlight ever could. The market had decided. Vision had won. And I had finally, completely proven that I'd had it all along.